That's fine. We just thought you might have been summoned to something, and we'd do some housekeeping before you arrive. So we're delighted to have you with us. This will get minuted later under Chair's business, but I think we should start the meeting, Bruno, by expressing our disappointment of the news that you broke for us, but our gratitude to you for all the work you've done in the nearly 7 years that you've been at the Trust. I don't imagine that the work that you've done actually here was quite what you expected it to be like when you arrived, and the last couple of years would have been challenging for any organisation and any chief executive. And I think you've impressed us enormously with the way that you have led us through the challenges of the pandemic. So we will have many other opportunities, I'm sure, to express our thanks to you for all that you've done for the Trust. But I just wanted to open this meeting by acknowledging that, and I'm sure I speak for all my colleagues in expressing that gratitude. So while we completely understand the decision that you've made and why it's right for you, we're all in a little bit of sense of shock, and therefore are processing it, as I'm sure you know from talking to us all. So thank you, Bruno. There's lots more to be said about that, but we're trying to do our best in this meeting to limit the intrusion of the monitoring business and supervision business that the board has to do with the really pressing tasks that our team is dealing with at the moment as we move through the Omicron phase of the pandemic. So we're aiming in this meeting to focus on the issues that we need to be thinking about during this period, and spending less time than we might in a less pressurized period of our work on rereading and noting some of the papers. So quite a lot of the board agenda items today will be taken by exception, and we'll focus on those areas where we really think it's important to discuss now. And so we hope that this public meeting of the Trust Board, which is being recorded so that people can see the Trust Board business, will last around an hour and a half, and then enable our executive team to get focused on dealing with the pressing issues in the hospital. So welcome to those who are watching the meeting. We have apologies today from our non-executive director, Joy Warmington, who was hoping to be here until yesterday, but COVID issues have put pressure on her own organisation, and she doesn't think she will be able to make it today. We should, I think, check any declarations of interest that need to be made, and I need to make one this morning, because in December I agreed to join an independent ethics council that is being convened by the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company. This will be not part of Bayer's decision-making process, but it is supporting and challenging the company on their development of positions on key bioethical questions. It aims to meet 3 or 4 times a year, and I joined that first meeting on the 13th of December. That was shared with Neil and with Anne for probity at the time, and obviously goes in the declarations of interest. I don't believe there'll be any circumstances in which there might be a potential conflict, but if there are, we will manage that effectively. Does anybody else have any declarations of interest that they need to make? Anne? I think you're off mute now, Anne.
Sorry, just my normal one about being a trustee of Oxford Hospitals Charity.
Thank you. Any further declarations of interest for today? We do have a couple of attenders, I think, although I can't quite see who's here, but Fatima Ali, Cancer Access Performance Manager, and Elliot Dickinson, Interim Corporate Governance Project Manager, I think are with us observing. This is, of course, a public meeting, and all our staff could be with us observing, but they're particularly there because they're interested in what we're doing. And Claire Winch, if she's not already with us, will be with us when we get to item 10. I don't believe we have a governor physically in the meeting today, but I'm sure we will be observed by the governors, and we have a Council of Governors meeting this evening, so we'll be able to pick up issues with them as well. I think that's all the housekeeping issues. Minutes of the meeting we held in November. I'm not alerted to any corrections to those. Are there any corrections that need to be made? Tony.
Thanks, Jonathan. Just, I think, in paragraph 30 of the minutes, we did also discuss the work that is ongoing about the remedial actions that will be undertaken to try and reduce over time the pressure ulcers, spores, etc. That Sam is leading. And I think it's probably worth mentioning that we did discuss that.
Thank you. Would you be happy to email Neil with a sentence to that effect?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Neil, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to note that that Sarah Randall has highlighted to me some small typographical errors in paragraph 32 relating to the breast 2-week weight standard, and clarifying that that is the standard that's referred to there. So we will make some edits to reflect that.
Thank you very much. Katie?
Yes, thank you. And I emailed this to you, Neil. I don't know if you've seen it. I can't remember this, and I'm willing to be corrected here. But in item 55, it says Dr. Pulford explained that the intention was to use the following 5 years to scope what excellence for the organisation meant. Did it 5 years, really? Is that what it said? It just struck me as odd when I read the minutes back. But I mean, if somebody said that, then fine. But
I don't think she said that.
no,
It would be quite
struck me
unlike her
very
to
odd.
put
So
that timescale on anything. Perhaps Neil, you could ask Claire Pulford to clarify that for us and circulate after, not waiting for the next meeting, but just circulate what that minute should be, and then we will note it on the next meeting.
Thank you.
Megan, do you think that's a reasonable way forward? Yeah, and you had your hand up too. You had your hand up, Megan. You're on mute.
It was just to answer that, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, your hand is still up. Is that a new point?
It is. Just a request, perhaps, to Neil to avoid the use of the term significant unless it has statistical connotations. Maybe use substantial.
The pedant in me approves of that, Tony. Although, of course, there are other types of significance and statistical significance, but I think that would avoid some confusions. That is the longest discussion we've had of the minutes, I think, for some meetings, as we're trying to strip down our focus and make sure we're more efficient. Thank you very much, everybody, and Neil will pick those up. Can I take us now on to the action log? And I think there's quite a number of items which I'm going to propose that we should be able to close. 003, the financial risk dashboard, we now have in the IPR. 005, the medicines reconciliations between the weekend and the weekday, now goes into the IPR as well. So that's those both, I think, can be closed. The medicines reconciliation briefing for IAC and the review of the pharmacy function, I think, is that ISA has been briefed and that will come back to IAC. So I think for the board, we can close that action. 008 on mandatory vaccinations we have on our agenda today. So I think that unless we have new actions out of that, we would aim to close that. There were 3 items that were marked as open, but I'm hoping we may be able to close them. So on the 004 pre-COVID benchmarking, we have a fair bit of that now coming into the IPR. And my suggestion is that we close it as a general item. If we pick up new things, we can talk about that, but I hope we can close it as a general item. 010 on the RIDDOR reporting. People will have seen, it may only been this morning, some of you seen it, I'm a bit behind, I saw it this morning, that there is a proposed format which includes in it the reporting of the escalation process as we've gone through, And my suggestion is that we regard this item as closed, as it will now come through, and then we can identify new things as it comes through. I propose that we close that, but if people, when they've had a chance to digest that version, want to raise it again, we would of course have the opportunity to refine it further. And on 012, the 104-week waits, colleagues will remember that we looked at that in some detail at the last Integrated Assurance Committee, and I think we should leave it there in terms of the monitoring process. We obviously have the IPR details on that. Sarah, I don't know if you want to say any more. No, perhaps not. Won't say any more about that here, because if I get my way, you can pick that up on the IPR very shortly. So I feel that we've actually done the actions that enable us to close all of those, and I want to check whether colleagues confirm that. Sarah.
So just the last item on there, 00111, the urgent care clinical standards at the moment, Chair, have not been released. So originally I think they were looking at April, but I understand that's been delayed now. So I haven't got a date. So until that time they're out, then obviously it'll come back to board.
Thanks, Sarah. So we never thought we would close that item today, but we did think we might close it in March. And what you're saying now is we won't be able to close it in March. So I think when we next meet, if Neil can be briefed on when we might be able to close that, we'll have the realistic target on that.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. OK, so I think everybody is happy, Neil, that those items that we've... Claire.
Sorry, Jonathan. I just wanted to mention that the FTSE sort of structure and funding, etc., is still something that's open, and I was expecting to see it in the actions, because on 53 of the minutes it says it will come back to the board, but it isn't there.
Thank you. It is due to come back to the board. Eileen, can you remind me when?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We're proposing taking it through IAC and then on to board afterwards, because the structures have to be discussed within the operational proposals, within the operational line as well, Claire. So the plan always was to have an updated IAC and then bring back to the board. We can say March, but you will remember that a number of things have been delayed because of the recent Omicron. So, you know, March might be optimistic slightly, but that's the plan at the moment, Claire.
So I think then that needs to be recorded, Neil, as an action, so that we can track it through. Let's keep March as the aim, but we've noted that it might be a little bit later than that. Thanks, Claire, for that reminder. OK, thank you very much. I think that deals with the action log. In terms of Chair's business, I've obviously mentioned right at the beginning the most important bit of Chair's business, which is related to Bruno stepping down. I just want to say a little bit about our current thinking on the process for recruitment, which I don't want to distract from thanking Bruno for his outstanding service, but it is now a big job that we have to do as a result of Bruno's decision. So we will give the organisation and partners a little bit more information on this as it emerges, but essentially it's clear, I think, that Bruno is a hard act to follow, and therefore we will need help in identifying a successor. So the responsibility for recruitment of the non-exec, it sits with the non-executive directors, with the actual appointment of a chief executive needing the approval of the Council of Governors. So the NEDs have been able to start some discussions on that, supported by Terry. We will aim to use headhunters, but we will also aim to have a set of wide-ranging conversations with partners and staff around what we should be looking for in relation to new chief executive. So we're just in the process of working out what that looks like in practice, but we do want to make sure that as we create the person specification for the new chief executive, we're able to listen to people's views on what is needed. So we will explain how that's going to happen as soon as we've been able to scope the details. But I want at this stage to be clear with colleagues and especially with staff that we want to know views on the sorts of character that we need, sort of person we need going forward. But we will need to make that a fairly rapid process, because the longer it takes us to get started, the longer we will take to find Bruno's successor. So we hope to make more details available than that in the next couple of weeks, but that is the process. We want it to start open and transparent of what we're looking for, but I'm sure people appreciate that to attract candidates we need to give them a degree of confidentiality. So we're aiming to learn as much as possible about people's thinking early on, and then to feed that into a rigorous search and a robust recruitment process in due course. So there'll be more details on that, but I want to make that commitment now that we want to hear what people think about the qualities that we're looking for. I should also note, I think, that we have new leadership, of course, in the integrated care system, and I have my first session with the newly appointed chair, Javed Khan of the ICS, tomorrow, and so we'll be able to feed back to him on our issues, and also to all of us on what I pick up from him. And finally, on Chair's report, it was announced yesterday that Oxfordshire County Council is also about to start a recruitment process for a new chief exec. So we have a new vice chancellor being recruited at the University of Oxford. We have a new chief executive for Oxford University Hospitals Foundation Trust, and a new chief executive for Oxfordshire County Council. What could possibly go wrong in this process of recruitment, I wonder, for the area? So this is going to be quite a challenge for us all, but of course we relish challenges. So I think that's all I have for Chair's report, and Bruno, I will hand on to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. The report, I mean, is again extensive. I'll just pick 2 items out of it. One is the book Beyond Words. You have the link, and already you can see the e-version of the book. I was able to give personal copies to the executive directors yesterday, and the copies for the rest of the board are on its way. And all staff members who have ordered the book are getting it over the next couple of days. It's been, as you said earlier, a tremendous journey, unexpected for us all, with a big impact on our personal and professional lives. So we used the title Beyond Words because you can only capture it with pictures, and hopefully this will serve as a memory of a part in our lives that we will never forget. And I'm going to use this opportunity again to thank all of the, not just the colleagues, but all of the staff members who've done a tremendous job during the pandemic. It's still not over yet, but we'll come in a minute about Omicron and what we can expect. Hopefully, we see the end of the pandemic in sight. Crossing fingers, but in the meantime, hopefully you'll enjoy flipping through the book when you have a hard copy coming to you. The other thing I'll pick out of the report is the Community Diagnostic Center. This is a great new initiative along the Ring Road in Oxford, where we are offering sort of one-stop shop for diagnostics. It has all sorts of imaging, and also will have, I think, a great sort of location for patients to get their diagnostics more quickly. Hopefully we'll be able to maybe have a board there, Jonathan. It would be good to sort of have a physical view of this new initiative, which will serve the community quite well. And otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have on any of the items.
Thank you. Katie has fastest finger on this one. Katie.
Another question. I just want to pick up on the staff awards that is sitting in Bruno's report, and I've been chairing the panel for the team who are putting this together, and I just wanted to say what fabulous energy there is in that team, Bruno, and it's so great to see so many award nominations coming in, but also it's so great to see the strength of of dynamism that there is in that team to make sure that it's a really good recognition vehicle, especially given what the staff are going through at the moment. And so thank you to all the colleagues who have agreed to chair the panels to select the winners. That's very kind. And I would just make the point that we had obviously tried to plan an event in March, but that is now unlikely, and it looks like we'll probably have an event in June. But thank you, Bruno, for the opportunity to do that. That's been great fun.
Thank you. Looks like everybody read your report carefully and understood it, Bruno, and didn't need to ask questions, in which case I think that should take us on to the IPR. But I wonder, as we introduce the IPR, could we just have a flavour of what the hospital feels like at the moment in terms of COVID? Because I think there's something odd, isn't there, about looking at the IPR data, which is always a little bit out of date, and not acknowledging what the current pressures feel like. So Bruno, could you just give us a flavour of numbers and where we are now?
Yeah, so I think the infections have been rising in the past, and that has led to increased admissions. At peak, we had about 125 patients in the hospital, and I'm saying at peak because we believe the peak is behind us. We're now at around just under 100 patients in the hospital. We also see the staff absence because of COVID and self-isolation, we believe may also have peaked. It's coming down and hopefully will keep coming down. So all indications that we have is that infections, number of staff self-isolating, and number of patients that require admissions to the hospital are going down, which indicates to us that the peak may be behind us. It is still, just to put this into context, an extremely pressured environment. A&E is extremely busy, and we have great challenges, and there's a lot of pressure on staff to keep all of the services going. So I want to put the relatively good news in a relative context that it's still a very tough time.
Thanks, Bruno. And we read in a number of places about the need to cancel other services. How has that worked out for OUH?
Sarah, you want to come in? We had a number of services that were at reduced levels during the Christmas break to allow again staff also to take a break. But in terms of number of cancellations, Sarah, can you give the board the specific update?
The detail that I can send round to the board of the cancellations. We have had limited number of cancellations. We purposely reduced the number of elective inpatients over the Christmas and New Year period, as Bruno's just outlined. We have had some really quite difficult days in the last week. Colleagues will know that we did go to OPA level 4 last Tuesday, which is the highest of the escalations, where we had some particular issues around patients being delayed within our hospitals, but also overcrowding at our emergency department. So we did cancel our electives on that day and the preceding days, but we've tried to limit that and maximise the other sites to reduce the impact on our elective work and cancer work. So which has been good. One of the big issues around cancellations has been the access to critical care, as colleagues are aware of, not because of COVID, but because we've had some quite very poorly patients needing critical care, and that's fills our critical care departments. So that's the other reason. But I can send around perhaps the detail of the cancellations that we've had in the last couple of weeks, if that's helpful to colleagues.
So if that's not a big job, that would be helpful. But I think the key message is here is that you've not needed to create wholesale cancellations in the way that some organisations have needed to because of their pressure, and that you have to be congratulated, I think, on that, because a number of organisations have needed to drop a lot of other activity, and I'm pleased to hear that while there've been cancellations, that's not been wholesale and it's not been as disruptive as others have seen.
It's been a big team effort from all the executives and all the divisional teams working together across all the sites. So that's been really important, and that's helped.
Thank you. Just before I throw it open on the IPR, Terry, what's the latest stuff on staff vacancies?
So
sickness absence, sorry.
Oh, sickness absence. Okay. So what you see here is month 8, which is November, and it's gone up considerably in terms of sickness absence. Now it's more at 4.8% rather than the 3.9% that's where we were in November. We're taking a number of actions to support our staff who are off. A lot of it is the COVID isolation rules, and you would have seen that the government's also reduced the time that people need to be off now with isolation. But we're doing well-being checkups. The business partners are working with the divisional leads to make that we're calling people to support them, and we've also made some amendments in our overall procedure so that to make sure that people can come back to work, but it's considerably higher than is reported for November, or that it was in November.
Thanks so much, Terry. I hope colleagues will bear with me for that little sort of walk around, because we're trying very hard to focus on what is worth talking about and helpful to talk about today, given all the pressures on colleagues. So now I want to throw it open for questions and observations on the IPR. And Tony, you're first up.
Thank you, Jonathan. First of all, I just wanted to emphasise what Bruno and others have said about the unprecedented pressures across the NHS, numbers and of patients, and also problems with staff. And of course, the data in the IPR needs, as we've said, to be interpreted in the light of these extraordinary pressures. So I'm not going to go into specific details on my usual topics, but I think that we have in the past in this meeting discussed our exit strategy in terms of how we are in the longer term going to address and re-engineer the way in which we deal with things like falls, ulcers, etc. And I know that Megan and Sam were going to work together on pulling something together to try and get us a downward deflection on data of these 3 triangulating issues that have been steady, stubborn, as we've called them before, for the past couple of years. And I know that there's a report due on the category 2 ulcers this month, and it might be helpful to have an update on that when we next meet. But I think it would just be helpful to have a clear understanding of a timetable for when we might be able to discuss how we can address these stubborn issues with new directions and new strategy.
Thanks, Tony. I've got Sam up next, and she might want to comment on that as well. Sam?
I was hoping that Tony might ask this, so that's why my hand was up. So I did want to give an update on the work that Megan and I are reviewing at the moment. And I guess where we've got to is we really want to deliver a systematic approach to give assurance to the board around really around quality improvement and reduction of harm for our patients. So we've been looking, particularly as we've been focusing on maternity, around how we're assured, as I say, for these areas where we do have high volume reporting, which is the right thing to do. So a bit later on in private board, we're going to look at the perinatal quality surveillance model, which needs some tweaking, I think, but it's actually the model that Megan and I think will be most appropriate to implement on the review of falls, pressure ulcers and nutritional risks. I think what's really missing out of the IPR is the integrated nature where we need the balancing metrics. So for IAC, we will have a report which I will propose comes quarterly to board, but we continue to monitor the run rates through the IPR. but the critical triangulation that we need is around length of stay, acuity and dependency, staffing, outcome of patients, and we're proposing that we move to a divisional action plan and an overarching trust action plan, which is very much focused on QI. So I think that's the direction of travel if that's feeling like the right one, and we will have a quarterly report ready for the next IAC.
Thanks, Sam. So I think that becomes an action for the board with a hope to close it once it's been through a cycle through the IAC. Tony, does that give you the sort of timescale that you were looking for?
Yes, it does. And I just wanted to add that conversations I've had with both Sam and Megan outside the formal board meetings have reassured me considerably that they have an excellent approach to this problem and have been picking up on other items in other areas. So I have great confidence that what we will end up with is something that will work. And so, yeah, I'm very happy with that timetable.
Thanks, Terry. And I think this is an example of a generic problem we have, and that Sam knows that I have this about maternity. You know, we get information that we can't easily use because we can't quite see the connections between the different bits of it. So that sort of process that triangulates the interdependencies of different measures and helps us understand whether we're really making progress it's probably the next iteration of the IPR approach is clustering some of those things like that so that we can really see how to make a difference. Thank you. Claire.
Could you just sort of decode that for me a little bit? I mean, that all sounds good, and it sounds like we're going to get more information to help us understand what's going on. But if we look at some of those stubborn indicators where we've sort of hoped we fixed it and then actually they've dropped down again, and I accept that it's difficult to really tell where we are at the moment because we are in a pandemic. Are we getting to the nub of what the problems are within those particular areas through what you've just suggested, Sam?
So I think if you look at current, every incident is reported. That also anything of moderate harm or above comes to patient safety response team on a daily basis. So you can be assured that Megan and I have line of sight of all of those moderate harms. If we talk about tissue viability, the tissue viability team will visit the area and do an at the bedside rapid review and consider any further harm reductions in situ for that patient. The ward leader is then responsible for the more detailed fact finding and then the production of an action plan. Where at the harm review meeting, we look at all of the action plans. So where we find ourselves is spending more time writing multiple action plans than focusing on the quality improvement. So if you look at the perinatal quality surveillance model, there's a much more rapid surveillance judgment on whether care was, whether detriment was suffered as a result of care, and there's a quick categorization. And I think learning from how the maternity process use, our view is that we can develop one quality improvement programme per division and come up with the themes. And rather than worry about a run rate going up, if we can put the context to that, such as increased intensive care admissions for COVID, therefore proning, therefore increased risk of pressure ulcers in ITU, then it gives much more context rather than just we seem to have had a spike in ITU, let's have 12 action plans. We can do a more clustered review, and I think it will be more meaningful, and the surveillance report should tell a story and make much more sense to board and give assurance that we've got a grip and that we are improving on the right actions and using a much more QI approach than a sort of bureaucratic churn of action plans to tick a box that we have an action plan. So the divisional nurses, Ria, our consultant for tissue viability, consultant nurse, is adapting the process at the moment. The divisional nurses are very keen because I think it lends itself to more conversation around QI.
Thanks, that's really helpful, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Claire. Megan.
Thanks, Chair. So just in response to Claire's question, and just in addition to what Sam has said, I think a multi-professional approach is also what is required. So really discussing, not somebody else is going to come and look at this and create an action plan. It's more, at the bedside, the whole team realizing that this patient has a grade 2 ulcer. So what are we doing about it? What has led to this? And how can we stop it progressing? Not leaving it for someone else to come and attend. And I think that whole sense of multi-professional involvement in caring for the patient in totality is something that's going to ultimately try and get us to reduce the numbers of patients who come to getting ulcers or falling in our hospitals. And we are embedding that with all teams now, particularly as we get a ward level view, because we didn't have a ward level view, and now we're starting to get, with what Mark Curry has done, ward level view of where these things are happening, where are the pressure ulcers happening, is there a trend, is there a particular reason they're happening in this area, and those are the reasons. That's what we need to explore.
Thanks, Megan. I mean, this is a specific example of a problem we've been grappling with for a long time, isn't it? That we're awash with pieces of with data points, but we can't use them as effectively as we ought to be able to, and this is a process for doing that. Tony, I think you're. Is this the end of this bit of conversation, or is it a completely new one?
It's a little bit of an add-on and response also to Claire, just because I think there is an important piece of information embedded in the current IPR, which is reassuring, and that, for instance, relates to grade 2 ulcers, and there's been a drive to increase the reporting of those, and you can see that very clearly in the data that they've gone up very substantially. And the principle behind that is to get to grade 1 and grade 2 before they get to grade 3 and treat them appropriately. Now, it hasn't yet filtered down all the way through that process yet, but you can see that interventions do work, and that's what brings confidence to this process. And it's just a question of, taking it from beginning to end all the way through. So I'm confident that we can get it right. And ulcers aren't a particular issue of mine, although they might seem to be. But ulcers, falls, etc., as we've discussed, is a triangulation and reflection of care and quality that transcends specialties. And that's why I think it's important to get this culture right, because there's a big penumbra of benefit around it.
Thanks so much, Tony. Paula.
Thank you. One of the other statistics that we watch so carefully is the length of stay. We referred to it in that last conversation, and we talked about how this IPR has to be read in the context of the pressures on the hospital at the moment. Knowing how important that is to the flow through the hospital, I wondered if someone could just give us an update on, whether we're getting any traction or any improvement, because obviously the data that we have here is November, but this is so key to our flow. So I would welcome an update. Thanks,
Paul. Before I hand over to Sam to do that, I know Mark's listening to this conversation, and I put in a plea for anybody's ability to think about the equivalent pulling together, as we've just been talking about, because there's the same sort of issue about A&E, isn't it? Our information tells us A&E is under pressure, but it doesn't necessarily tell us very easily how we resolve that. So we can see the numbers coming in, but it's often to do with flow. So there's a similar issue about how we can pull the information together to understand where we are better. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you. You're right, Paula, and length of stay, I think, is an indicator around, that goes back to the dependency of the patients, as much as the care hours that are available, because when patients are medically fit, their care needs are different, and it's about prioritisation. So that is a particular risk for us. We aim to have a length of stay of around 12% of over 21 days, and we're not achieving that. We're at 14.8. Now, the majority of our patients over 21 days length of stay are not medically fit and ongoing clinical care, but are medically optimised for discharge patient group. We're not seeing a reduction below 100. So we're working very hard with the system. And in fact, Megan, Sarah, Bruno, myself and Eileen met with the regional team yesterday to talk through improvements that we're making and progress that we're making as part of the urgent care system work, but also to flag the risks that we need support from place-based So I won't go into detail due to time, but just to assure you that there's ongoing improvements continuing at system level, but some escalations have been made to really reduce the medically optimised position, which has a significant impact not just on those patients, but also flow and ability to get other patients through onto their own pathways.
Thank you.
Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Just quickly, so the initiative that's happened within the system is called what they call a MADE event, a multidisciplinary discharge event. And to complement that, we're also internally doing a rapid improvement cycle on discharges, particularly focused on some key wards in medicine and within trauma. And that will be then, as we learn through that, we'll be expanding that across the other wards across the trust. So in the middle of doing that process and that escalation, so which is really encouraging. So being headed by Lisa Glynn and Louise Johnson and our head of quality improvement with our clinicians.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of sort of more detailed points that I picked up. I was going to pick up on length of stay, but that's been dealt with. Just one on the RIDDOR. I noticed there was a near miss incident of an explosion around a AICU, which looked a little bit alarming. So that was the first one, just to understand a little bit about that and the action plan that we've put in place. And my second point, which I'll raise, is a capital forecast point. So it's a financial point, but also relates to CCU, because I noticed that we're forecasting an overspend of 3.9 million on capital. There are some pluses and minuses in that, but within that there is a forecast overspend on CCU of 3.6 million, and I just wanted to understand a bit more about that as well and what we can do about that.
Thanks. Sam, your hand shot up.
So I'm hoping that the board are assured by the revised process that going forward, should we have a RIDDOR of such significance, the board would be informed. And that's partly why we talked about strengthening the process. I know that this incident was shared at the Critical Care Programme Board, where Anne is a member, and going forward, incidents of this nature and from previous month would be alerted and the board would be briefed. So the root cause of this incident was human error. We've had external reviews and all processes are in place, but there was a human error in this particular incident. I can share more detail offline, but just due to the fact we can identify individuals, I'll probably leave it there.
Thanks, Sam. We do have a confidential session of this board, so Anne, you would be able to pick it up there if you wanted to. Jason, were you coming in also on the capital issue?
Thanks, Chair. Yes. So I mean, firstly, hopefully all board members noticed this, and obviously has. We've taken the format that we used in the fourth quarter of last year, particularly in investment committee last year, actually, to summarise the capital position. And alongside putting the revenue forecast into the pack, which I think you all saw at IAC, we've put the detail of the capital forecast into this pack. And I'm sure that we'll do some of the detailed scrutiny of it at investment committee, but I think there's a widespread view to see more of that here. And hopefully you also have noticed that towards the front of the finance section, there are two simple summaries of the capital and revenue forecast at a glance, so that you can see at a glance the drivers to the forecast, but then you don't have to go straight to the detail, but the detail is all there. So just going to the exact question, Chair. The main issue here, and it's presentational probably, is that the NHS England have asked us to flush through the balance of the currently unfunded element of the critical care building as a forecast overspend. So the board will remember when we started this project, we had the building funded. NHS England asked us to take the equipment out of our bid because they thought they would provide it. They then subsequently realised they wouldn't, and they've been working with us over the course of this financial year to get that equipment funded. We got somewhere between half and 2/3 of that unfunded element, actually, no, sorry, a third to a half, funded via the targeted investment fund bid that we put in the autumn. But effectively, and that most of this reported overspend effectively is not an overspend versus our internal programme budget, but flushing through the unfunded element. And I'm continuing to have a very positive dialogue with the regional team about a shared intention to utilise underspends elsewhere in the region to fund us for that by the year end. There is a small, but we're in low hundreds of thousands of pounds, I think, current view of overspend on the overall building, and some of that is to do with things like the unexpected community infrastructure levy that we're still challenging with the council, but is in the forecast. But the bulk of it is the balance of that unfunded element.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam and Jason. Sarah Horton.
Thank you. I've got a couple of different themes, but I'll just follow on the financial one as we're sort of there. Jason, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that's gone into the numbers presentation. I found that really helpful, starting to really be able to see where the numbers are coming from. A couple of questions around those financials. There's quite a significant surplus on the COVID funding when you look at the breakdown between the different streams, and there's a sort of slightly throwaway comment that we've underspent in terms of pay cost on COVID, and we've got a surplus on that funding stream. Is there any risk that there might be clawback of the COVID funding that would then leave us with a hole in the overall position?
Thanks, Sarah, and yes, good to have spotted that, and at least one other colleague has sort of messaged me privately saying they spotted it as well. Actually, the first thing to say is we've been reporting this issue in this paragraph of the pack, sort of every IPR all year. The number just gets bigger as it racks up, and it's probably the point to looking at it. So no, I'm not worried about clawback. Unless potentially we were forecasting a surplus by the year end, in which case adjusting the balance of this funding might be one of the mechanisms the ICS would use to try to sort of bring us closer to break even. It's NHS England, I think, understand pretty well that the continuation with adjustments of the emergency funding regime for a fourth half this year has caused unders and overs all over the funding settlement. So, for example, we've been desperately underfunded vis-a-vis NHS England's ambitions in relation to, for example, elective recovery, and actually we've been quite generously funded, as you can see, for COVID. I think and we've been very transparent about that. There's a sort of summary, sort of segmental almost version of the INE 2 or 3 slides into the report to sort of show how those different buckets work. I think the challenge is more in relation to 22-23, when the details of the funding we'll have next year are not yet published. The funding regime will probably be, NHS England's CFO describes their ambition is to create a glide path over 3 years back to a more a sort of more rational funding regime. So I think what we can expect to see from that, and I'll try and share some detail maybe at IAC, I think we can expect to see on the one hand, this budget line will be one of the areas that NHS England seeks to adjust to bring NHS finances back to a sort of pre-COVID position. But they're looking very closely at the run rate of every organisation in the country, which is why they're articulating it as a glide path rather than a cliff edge, because they know that COVID has caused some real disruptions to resource allocation. So I think we'll see some pressure here next year. It'll be a downward glide path, not an upward glide path, but they are promising no cliff edge.
Thanks, Jason. Sarah, response to that and your next theme.
Yeah, so that's really helpful. Thank you, Jason. There are a couple of others in the finance section, and then I'll add my last one in as well, so you've got them all. But just in terms of that glide path and the pressures, I noticed that other costs are 13.7 million more than plan. And I wondered what was sitting in that bucket and whether there is a looming risk coming. And again, on the sort of risk factor,
noticed that both pay and whole-time equivalents seem to be creeping up. Again, some really good data in Terry's sections, which I think then sort of triangulate through into the financials, but would be interesting to hear where we think. I know that's been a focus for places we were looking for saving. I also know with elective care going up and the COVID pressures, that's a difficult place to take a saving. So it'd be interesting to hear where we think the pay and whole-time equivalence positions coming out. And then my non-finance one, just so that you've got them all, was just to understand where the cancer wait times are sitting in light of all the pressure we've been under over the last sort of 6 weeks, couple of months.
So we go to Jason for the finance ones first.
Thanks, Joe. I will just come in. I won't even put my hand up this time. Yes, so I think the trend on pay actually is fairly flat. And actually, if you look at the detailed chart, I mean, actually, we've had a long period of actually relatively stable pay. If you look at the trend sort of before the last 6 months, there's been more volatility, and actually there was also more volatility in the period behind that. There is, as you say, a slight upward tick in whole-time equivalents. In month 8, it was split a little bit between substantive staff and an agency staff, bank staff. We just closed out month 9, and I don't want to sort of preempt that too much, but effectively the whole-time numbers are pretty flat. We spent a bit more on bank and agency in December again. Looking as we go through this winter, actually, we have, I think we're going to have a more stable pay position than last year. We're managing Omicron and winter without the scale of winter staff incentives. The board will remember that this time last year, and indeed over the Christmas period, we were debating spending several millions of pounds on staff incentives, and the spike in March pay last year was partly truing up actually all the money spent very rapidly in Q4 last year, and we shouldn't expect to see anything like that. And we have kept our pay and headcount control process intact over this period. We are making a slight adjustment, and you may see a little bit of this in month 8 and a bit more in month 9 and month 10. The divisions have asked us to give them latitude to recruit a few dozen more admin and clerical staff because into vacancies, so not new posts, but they have convinced the executive team they'd reached a point where their ability to most effectively book and utilise our elective capacity was actually being held back by probably some gaps in their booking teams. So Sarah, Terry and I, with the rest of the exec team, worked quite carefully to give them a latitude to recruit, I think it was 50 or 60 more admin and clerical staff. Sarah's mouthing a number which I which will come through, so that will drive a little bit of an uptick. We need to watch it carefully, but I think that the Q4 headwinds are much less strong this year than they have been in the last 2 years, actually.
Come back on that, Sarah. Sarah, how old I was thinking back on, sorry.
Yeah, I think that sounds encouraging that you're, at least there's grip on the question at least. And can you just pick up, Jason, on the on that other costs lump that's sitting there?
Yes, the main driver to that is that we're putting a lot of our use of the independent sector through other costs. And we've been getting a lot of money from NHS England for that. So it's largely matched by income. And it's both not a recurrent commitment and it's matched by income.
Okay, it would probably be helpful if we could just draw that out in the IPR reporting so we can see that.
Yeah, I'll look to what I can do. You've seen probably, haven't you, Sarah, in the appendix, that the next round of the gradual plan to improve this report is a sort of trial SPC chart on other costs in the appendix, and if that appears to work, that will get into the main report, and that will help us sort of weed out the noise from the clear signals on and trends in some of those pay lines, non-pay lines.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anne, was it on the finance issues? Because I need to make sure Sarah, yeah, so we'll go to Anne and then back to Sarah Randall to talk about the cancer Anne.
It was just on that same point. I mean, there are a lot of things within the income and expenditure account that have income and expenditure netting off. And I know in the past, and obviously I've been here a while, but we've made attempts to try and somehow exclude that in the reporting, so that you're not, you know, because if you look at income on one view, and then you look at costs, and if you don't necessarily realise that there are netting off costs, it gets quite complicated. So I would really welcome some kind of attempt again to have a go at that, so that we, you know, we can see, you know, those items, and it's not just those particular type of items, but there are lots of areas where this happens. So we can sort of see that, and therefore, you know, discount it in understanding the variances. So just to support that, really.
Chair, we'll have a look. I'm very reluctant to net off consistently for a couple of reasons. One is actually NHSI don't let us net off in all our reporting to them, which would make our internal reporting very inconsistent. The other is that although these items are backed by income, there's always degrees of risk associated with the income. So, for example, on the big pass-through drugs expenditure, there's always a risk. It's very complex, actually, record keeping. And if we get it wrong, we get challenged by NHS England. So netting off has the sort of the effect of discounting the risk on the income, and it's not zero risk.
To be fair, I don't think that's what you meant, did you, Anne?
No, it's more in the analysis, in terms of analysing the variances, finding a way to demonstrate that the situation where there's potentially that going on.
I think we're all aiming to do the same thing, so we can pick that up outside the meeting, I think, and, you know, it just helps us understand what is worth talking about and what is not as significant an issue as it might be. But often understanding that enables us to focus on what actually is the sense of challenge. Okay, so to Sarah Randall now on cancer weights.
Thank you, Chair. So I think colleagues on the board are aware that we've got a number of improvement programmes and oversight with key tumour sites within cancer, which are around breast, urology, lung pathways and endoscopy in particular. I think over the last month, since the November data that we, the data that we've got in the pack, the October data, we have seen a decline again within our breast services and some of our areas because of absences we've got within our workforce, and that in part has been due to some of the COVID absences that have affected both ward and theatre capacity. But also some vacancies, again, as we've seen in the report around, in particularly in radiology, that we've seen again vacancies in mammographers. We had got a recruitment. I think I've informed colleagues the last time. We've now seen another dip in mammographers. So we're looking at working again with colleagues across the ICS and other agencies to see if we can get some additional staff in. We have seen an increase in particular referrals for tumour sites. So skin has seen a real increase in skin cancer referrals, 2-week wait referrals. Actually, that's also been seen across the ICS and nationally. And whether that's a delay to COVID delays, we're just looking at that nationally. We've yet to find out the actual root cause of what that increase is. We did see a dip in referrals naturally, as we do over the Christmas New Year period, and seen a rise in breast referrals, particularly coming into this last couple of weeks within January. We have also seen over the Christmas period an increase in some of the 104-week waits, although in the last week we have seen a reduction in, sorry, not week waits, day waits, reduction in those patients, particularly in urology. Some of those patients are particularly complex with multiple comorbidities. We have noticed a number of referrals being delayed from other trust into trust transfers, so coming to us really post the 62-day, so into the late 90s, where again they've had complex patients and comorbidities to deal with, and those have come to us late as a cancer centre, so they will obviously have a knock-on effect to our performance of 62 days. But I'm pleased to say we are starting to see that reduction in 104-day waits. The other element that we are going to see some reduction is in radiotherapy. I think colleagues are aware that we are replacing our 6 Linacs on the Churchill site, which is well received, but that's a 2-year programme which would end in 2023. And we're looking at, and that reduces some of our capacity. Clearly, when we have the new Linacs in place, that will increase, but we're looking at extending days and working with other colleagues across the Thames Valley Cancer Alliance to see if we can have some additional capacity. I think that's my update. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah Randall. Sarah Horton, did you want to come back on that? You don't need to. You can just shake your head. She doesn't need to. Sarah, Randall, while we're with you, could you just update us on where you think you are with the 104 weeks as opposed to days? Obviously, the data that you gave us offers all sorts of encouraging things, like a oculoplastics-a-thon, which is a new concept to me coming in January, and I just wondered whether, given what you said earlier about some cancellations and where we are. Megan, were you putting your hand up to answer that question on Sarah's behalf, or no? So Sarah, could you just update us from where we are now as opposed to where we are on the slide?
Yes, so thank you. So I think the oculoplastics-a-thon was part of the work that we've been doing with the ICS as a cataract-a-thon and ophthalmology-a-thon. So we actually went early and completed those cases for us. We managed to do that within the Christmas New Year period, which was really great for our patients that have been waiting a long time. In the pack we looked at, we've got 67 patients waiting that 104 weeks for that the end of March for that time. If we look forward to the end of March, at this moment in time, we've got just over 140 patients that will be 104 weeks at the end of March. We have a lot of plans. Many have been dated, so just over 100 patients have been dated, which is really good news. We are in the process of dating the last few patients. We have some areas that we've got some concerns about, which we've identified in the pack, particularly on spinal patients, both in adults and paediatrics. So we're working with colleagues across the trust. We're also asking some mutual aid. We've got some patients that we are sending to London to support, to help us, but also I'm asking for mutual aid outside of the ICS to support us in making sure that we can see those patients in a timely way. So we have 2 patients that have chosen to wait over the end of March at the moment. There may be more. And clearly, with perhaps some of the complexities, we don't know the absolute numbers as yet, Chair, of where we're going to land at the end of March, but obviously working hard to reduce down to 0.
Thanks, Sarah. That's an enormous piece of work, and I really appreciate the grip on the detail that's there, which I think is very encouraging. Are we being asked to offer mutual aid to others in bits where we have capacity and they don't?
Yes, we are being asked to give mutual aid. So during the end of December and until last week, we've been supporting cardiac surgery from some colleagues, from some trusts within the South East region, from Torbay, Gloucester, Swindon, and also Cornwall. So and last week we've been asked to support University of Southampton hospitals with cardiac P1Bs and P2s. As yet we've not received any patients from that. We've also been asked to and we've been doing some mutual aid for other areas, but that's been quite limited.
Thank you. I was asking that really because it's not very reasonable for us to call upon others for mutual aid if we're not able to help where we have some capacity. So that's reassuring to hear. I'm not sure whether that'll make it in the minutes, but I think, Sarah, you said Southeast initially and then have a whole load of Southwest trusts in that. So
it's the other way around. So Southwest providers had asked us, and now we've been asked to support University Hospital Southampton.
Thank you. Megan.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to bring to board's attention the slide, page 48 of the pack, which shows that we had a rise in incidents that have been reported. And the reason I want to draw this to your attention is because a majority of this increase is down to the incidents in maternity. And this follows Sam and my review of the incident reporting in maternity, where we had to classify the reporting differently. Sam and I met with the clinical director and the head of midwifery to discuss this with them. And this is what is reflected in the rise in moderate incidents, so that we such that we classify incidents based on the impact of harm or impact of the incident to the patient, rather than classifying them following a clinical review. It does not mean that there is a sudden difference to the quality of care being offered. It simply means that we are classifying the incidents in a different way. What I've also done is I have introduced Catherine Greenwood, our clinical director, to the lead for obstetrics in the southeast of England. And I've requested them to undertake some work on benchmarking of these incidents across the Shelford trusts. They will do that. I've also corresponded with some of the CMOs in the Shelford Trust, and they do report the incidents that Sam and I have now reclassified as moderate incidents. So I just wanted the board to know that.
Thanks, Megan. I think, as Tony said earlier, it's good that we have these things exposed so that we can understand them better. So it's really helpful to have that clarification. While you're on, can I ask you about never events? And can I repeat, I think this is the third time I've said I would love not ever to see a report on never event without it also telling me whether the patient was harmed. And we've still got 2 never event reports in the IPR, and they tell us lots of things, but they don't tell us actually whether the never event ended up in harm to the patient. So could you just clarify that for the record, Meghna?
Yes, so this, again, I'm sorry about that. This is a patient who had a retained vaginal pack after gynecological surgery and was discharged home once the pack was removed. Came back and with the pack and was discharged home again. And there was no impact on the patient's outcome, and the patient was not harmed. Sorry, Chair, I thought we discussed it at the IAC last month, which is why I didn't bring it up again. But I completely take your point, and I have told the team to change the way it's written.
That's fine, Megan. I was aware because you briefed us that they weren't there, but this is a public meeting, and this will be the first time it's visible to people, and it's important. And the other never event is linked to the 2 we had previously. There was the medical error event, and we've heard about the actions being taken on that. So I don't think we need to hear more about the actions. I just think we need to be assured that the patients are not harmed. Thank you. Could I ask, I don't know if any others, I've got one other question that hasn't yet come up, and it's for Terry. And Terry, I wanted to ask how you thought we should interpret the increase in turnover. So I can think of 2 possible explanations, and there are probably lots of others. One is that we're simply beginning to transition back to the sorts of turnover that would have been expected if it were not for COVID, and we're not yet at the rates of turnover that were our target pre-COVID. But the other is that a number of our staff might not be leaving for other jobs, as is normal turnover, but might have decided that they want to leave the NHS. And I think if that was part of the pattern, it would be important for us to have an understanding of it and the risks to stability of our workforce going forward. So I wondered what we knew about reasons for leaving for the people who are in that turnover slide.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So the reasons when we look at the breakdowns for reasons for leaving, they're the normal trends at the moment. So retirement hasn't gone up significantly, which we were expecting that to be a big issue in relation to people getting tired post-COVID. So we haven't seen that big increase in retirement. We're still seeing a good number for promotion and voluntary resignation. There's some further work that we're doing to increase the exit interview data so that we can know specifically the reasons why people are leaving, because some of the information that comes out in ESR is fairly generic, like voluntary resignation, but it does have things like retirement, promotion, etc., etc. So those are staying almost static in relation to the proportion. We do have a concern that there will be some form of burnout. We've been doing a number of things to reduce the impact of that, like such as the R3P program and a lot of the well-being checks. So it's something that we're keeping our eye on. We haven't seen a significant difference in the data yet. We're going to be doing some further work to get better and higher kind of like response rates to our exit interviews in order to do some further analysis. We'll also be tying this in with our staff survey results as well, to see, you know, what our people are feeling and thinking, especially from a health and well-being aspects. But that's where we are at the moment.
Thanks, Terry. So there are no particular signals on this that you would say lead us to do different things than we already have in plan, but we clearly need to keep an eye on that issue. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments that fall out of the IPR? Okay, thank you very much. We're a little behind my target to end at 10:30, but let's hope we can still manage to get close to that. So the next item on the agenda is the Building a Green OUH. Colleagues will remember that we had an opportunity to look at many of the issues around this in seminar in November, and we were alerted then that it would be coming to this board. And David, I think it's your item.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'll take the papers and plan as read, but if I could just take a few moments to summarise the key points, please. So building the greener OUH presented today sets out our commitment to driving sustainable development and to enable us to deliver high quality care and make the best use of our resources in the future. We know that our staff are concerned about climate change and believe that it's important to the Trust to work more sustainably. To create the plan today, our strategy team engaged with over 700 members of staff, patients and partners who came together to share their views and challenged us to make impactful changes. The plan sets out these priority areas for action, which are procurement and supply chain, medicine, digital transformation, estates and facilities, and travel and transport. The plan also includes elements mandated by NHS England for a Trust Green Plan and sets out our aim to be net carbon zero by 2040, which is in line with the national net zero ambition and the local zero carbon Oxford Charter that OUH signed in February of last year. The plan also celebrates some of the excellent work already underway across the Trust, for example, the LED light replacement programme or our partnership with Pedal and Post to deliver drugs to the Churchill and Radcliffe. It does, however, reflect the size of the challenge facing us, and as such, it is being presented to the board today for approval, so that the next stages, including working with our partners in Oxfordshire and the ICS, and the development of our detailed roadmap can commence. And finally, it's important to note that the plan outlines our intentions. The future roadmap will set out the monitoring, frequency and governance of how we will deliver this, including how we can build green into our service and business plans as we move forward on such an important agenda. So, as I say, I'll take the paper and plan as read and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, David. Claire, you're first off.
Thanks, David. I think this is really important and very welcome. Could you just say something about how this plan and the sort of actions set out in it sort of translate into organisational, executive and sort of senior management objectives?
Well, I don't think they set out, this is the element that we want to develop from the roadmap piece, Claire. So I think some of the items that we need, or some of the things that we need to deliver to achieve this ambition of net zero, some of them are very short-term items, some are much medium and longer term ambitions. What I would like to do is use the time while we're developing the detailed roadmap to see how we stitch that into our objectives moving forward. So actually we think green on all our future plans, and how we weave that through into rolling objectives, because this should be something each year. It's not going to be a 2022 one-off.
No, that would be great. And I think it's so important, because if it's not in there, then we're much less likely to deliver when you get to the action plan stage.
Sarah Horden.
Thank you, David. I thought it's come on well from the early draft we saw of this, particularly around some of the sort of benchmark data about where we think our carbon footprint currently sits. There's just one point of detail, which is in the estates piece, we talk about building using low carbon processes. I'm sure you mean it, but I think one of the key things we need to do is think about improving the thermal performance of our buildings, because if we can reduce the amount of heat we need, that clearly has both a significant green impact, but also, given the risks we're seeing around energy prices, I think there's a fundamental issue around actually thinking about how we invest to improve thermal performance, probably in the short to medium term.
Absolutely, acknowledge that, and we'll seek to make that a little bit more explicit in the plan. So,
thank you, Katie.
Thanks. And I recognise this is a sit down and have a cool drink moment, but was any thought given to doing better than net zero, i.e. being a positive influence on the climate and not just becoming a net zero provider?
I think from a ambition perspective is one thing. From an achievability and deliverable perspective, that's much more multifaceted and complex, isn't it? So it is in our gift to reduce our carbon. It's not necessarily in our gift or our financial establishment to drive on to that next stage. I think this is the first iteration of a green plan. I don't expect that we will recognise this in 5 years' time, because I think we'll have moved on to the next level of ambition, Katie, and I think society will have moved on to that next level of ambition also.
Yes, I think that's what came out of COP26, is the fact that net zero as an ambition is almost old hat, you know. So you're quite right. I think it's an iterative approach, but thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, look, Katie sort of asked my question. I was just, the point is that how on earth do we ever get net zero? It's just simply not possible in the NHS, in my view, unless we were allowed to offset. It's just, I mean, I completely applaud all effort to reduce, and we should do that as speedily as we can. But actually having an ambition of net zero just doesn't seem realistic to me.
I think we're stuck with articulated ambition, and then we really need to try and work out what we can deliver. And I think that's, David, what you described in terms of the next steps of the process, and Claire picked up in terms of none of this will happen unless we work out the concrete steps. And perhaps at that stage, we're able to review that sense of what's the realistic ambition. But at this point, I think I wouldn't want to prejudge that, because it'll stop us getting started. Not that we haven't started. It'll stop us increasing the momentum on this. So I think we'll note those things, and we'll see where the next steps take us. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reflecting on our approach to urgent care, in that we have an internal improvement programme as well as a system improvement programme. And I wonder whether we should sort of take that tack. And one of the reasons I say that is when Jason handed estates over to me, and then on further discussion with Bruno and Terry, you'll remember that I was supported in 5 key posts prior to the business case, which I do now have in draft, by the way. 2 of those posts, one of them related specifically to travel and transport, and the other to energy and sustainability. We've appointed into those posts. I know that Jason's also been leading on some work with procurement. So I wonder whether we should really sort of get going with our internal approach to improvement, and get some early traction and reporting, while some of the wider partnership piece is also in train.
Thanks. We're much more likely to succeed in working with our partners if they think we're serious internally, aren't we? So that's important. Jason.
Thanks, Jonathan. I just wanted to sort of draw out some issues that I can't remember if we discussed in our seminar. We certainly discussed as an executive team, and it touches a little bit on Gavin's point, which is the net zero ambition has been set for the whole NHS. I think the NHS England trumpeted the fact they thought the NHS was the first national health, first health system to target net zero. There's I think it's linked in here. The NHS net zero plan has got a very pretty and complicated sort of bridge table for how you might get to net zero, which everyone can sort of form their independent view on how quickly or how challenging that will be. But what's really striking, and it reflects a little bit of what's in this paper, is that there are some major areas of our emissions that can't be addressed quickly, and or can't be addressed without significant investment. So we've got a lot of very old buildings which actually it's not cost effective to retrofit. We actually need to work out how to get out of them, and that requires a lot of capital. But there are also quite a few areas of our emissions that we can actually work on locally. We can do a lot with our own supply chain, and there's a lot of national work being done with big NHS suppliers. And there are also areas of this plan which overlap with a lot of our non climate change related challenges. So, for example, if we could really shift the dial in how staff and patients expect to travel to and from the hospital, we could both make a big impact on the travel related portion of our emissions, and also make a big impact on actually congestion in our car parks, congestion in Headington, and the poor experience of delay. So there are some areas here I would just sort of suggest to the board we want to really see as something we can fix, because the supply chain requires a lot of national cooperation, but we'll do something. But travel and transport in Oxford, persuading people who, at least the large portion of our staff who actually work office hours, not the people who are working in the night, and the people visiting the hospital, perhaps not the patients, actually to think about the bus, to think about active travel. We can really push that. We can change the implied incentives in free parking versus paying to park at the park and ride, for example. We can shift that, and it makes a massive impact, and it fixes some other problems we have.
Thank you. So that all goes into play in concrete next steps that we identify, show that we're taking this forward. They don't, I think, stop us doing what we're asked to do today, which is to approve this plan. So I think from those questions, it's implicit everybody agrees that we should approve this plan, and actually we're thinking what comes next as opposed to talking about what's there now. So David, I think you have the approval that you need for this. Thank you very much, everybody. That takes us to vaccination of condition of deployment, which goes to Terry. We obviously are balancing the importance of confirming that we're approaching this systematically with the fact that the closer we get to understanding who is and who's not vaccinated, the more identified people come. So we're being careful about what we take in public and what we take in private on this. Terry.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take this paper as read, but I'll highlight some key points which I think are important. So as a trust, we've set up a steering group to manage this programme of work, and we meet weekly, and we've got a range of working groups with specific roles and tasks to carry out for the planning and implementation. We also now have the national guidance, which deals with a number of the IG issues that we initially had. So that takes out some of the issues that we were struggling with as well. In the weekly meeting, not only it's largely executive led with myself, Sam, and David in attendance. And we've got several groups such as staff engagement, data collection, health and safety, staff redeployment, employee relations, as well as manager training and support. And one of the most important groups is the clinical service impact and risk assessment and mitigation group as well. And underpinning all of that is the employee relations and policy group and the vaccination centres. Now, some of the key activities that we've undertaken have been primarily on focusing on staff engagement and encouraging staff to take the vaccine, to making their first and second dose available. And Sam and team have been really instrumental in opening it up for first dose and second dose. And we've seen an increase of around 120 people as a minimum who have taken their first dose since we've opened up our additional clinics. We've also been issuing guidance to line managers to support the conversations around the vaccine, and we've developed draft policies. Some of those policies we're planning to take them to TME and then see if we can get board agreement at IAC, because potentially it will involve the dismissing staff from all staff groups. So in line with the national mandate, we've also informed all our staff about the regulation through weekly bulletins, dedicated vaccine, virtual Q&A, which we held on the 22nd of December, which we've also now got in a YouTube format so that we can send it out not only to our own staff but to secondary staff and contractors as well, to help them. And we've also been locally informing managers via their HR teams as well. It is crucial, though, that the one-to-one discussions actually start to happen now to begin to address the individual concerns that people have. And we've got a number of consultants who are experts in this area who have offered their time up to have those individual conversations, because we've found that it's the individual conversations that have helped some people change their mind and take the first vaccine. The outstanding key issues and risks for us are in relation to service delivery and business continuity. And the clinical risk and mitigation group is reviewing the data, identifying the hotspots and looking at what remedial plans that we can put in place. Some of these may mean that we'll have to reduce the number of beds we have, because there won't be the temporary staffing available. And also we're going to finalise our definition of staff that are in and out of scope as well. And the clinical group is reviewing that, and the execs are going to have input into that as well. So our key priorities now are the one-to-one conversations around finalising and understanding the risk and the business continuity plans, around the staff engagement, and finalising our VCOD, vaccination as a condition of deployment policy. I'll open it up for questions there.
Thanks so much, Terry. Katie.
Thanks, Chair. So, Terry, and this is a sort of a bit of a flight of fantasy, but in 6 months' time, do we believe that we will still have the requirement to have staff vaccinated, or do we think by then it will become a moot point? And the reason I ask that question is, if we think there is any chance of that, is there an ability to redeploy staff for 6 months who are not vaccinated on the basis that at some point they may be able to return to frontline work?
So my short answer to that is no.
Okay.
The government won't allow that.
Okay. The only reason I ask the question is because the government may change.
Well, let's
not go into change of government. There's enough speculation about that. I'm going to stick with Terry's first answer and allow Paula to come in next.
Okay.
Paula.
Hi, thank you. Terry, thank you. That was a really comprehensive summary. And I know that you're going to bring, as you've just said, more policies and procedures to us as we go through the next very tricky stages of this. Just listening to you there, I did just want to say thank you to you and the team for the amount of effort and the comprehensive way you've gone about trying to work through this. I don't think any of us underestimate the challenges, but I was really comfortable is entirely the wrong word on this topic, but just assured that we were doing everything we could to get through the process, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's a hugely a team effort, and it's not easy, because essentially some people will end up losing their jobs if they don't move on this, and my feel on this is that it may affect patient care in the end, but we're gonna try and convince as many people as possible to take the vaccine.
Well, we've clearly got some tricky conversations yet to have and some processes that we need to work through as a board, but at least we're on journey, and thank you for that.
Thanks, Paul. I have Tony and then it'll be Gavin. Tony.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, I just too wanted to add thanks to Terry and his team for undertaking a very difficult and sensitive job at this time and doing it very well. Also to ask, I assume that all new starters are required to provide proof of vaccination from now.
Oh yes, we've put that in place already, but it's not all new starters. It's all new starters in scope. We've made that already a requirement in our job descriptions, in adverts, and in our processes as well.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks, Jonathan. Terry, I mean, I endorse all the thanks to you and your team for working this through. And I'm sorry if I missed this, Terry. What is the scale of the problem, and is it evenly spread across the trust, or are there particular patches where if we don't see a sea change, we can actually immediately anticipate that we will have service provision problems, as you suggested at the beginning?
Yes, so we're going to go into more detail in this in the private board. There are some areas which, at the moment, we've got particular concern around. One of the areas which we've discussed as execs and at the VCOD group is the healthcare assistants. The clinical risk group highlighted that, if the number of people that haven't responded in relation to who we think are healthcare assistants, if there isn't much movement in that group, we may have a significant problem, and that's because that is one group that actually may find it easy to get other jobs. They can go and get another job in retail and in other areas, and they'll probably pay more money as well. So as an exec, we're looking at how we're going to mitigate that risk, and we're going to work that through.
Thanks, Terry. We'll keep close to that, and as you say, we'll have a chance to look at some detailed issues where individuals might be implicitly identifiable in our confidential session. Terry, could I ask whether you think we have sufficient understanding of the position of staff who we don't directly employ? So that staff who are important in assessing that clinical risk, but are maybe employed by our PFI partners or maybe by the university. Do we have enough information on those in order to be able to properly assess those clinical risks?
So we've had conversation with our PFI partners as well, and Charmaine Hope and Andrew Carter raised that as an issue yesterday at our meeting. Well, they're going to need to give us evidence that their staff are double vaccinated. So they're starting to do some of that work. I've also had a meeting with OU about their honorary contract, and I also had that meeting on Monday as well. and we've given them a list of all of their people who are on honorary contracts, who we feel are patient facing, but they're going to have to deal with it because it's their employment and the effect that they would have. So they're going to come back and give us the assurance that they need and where they think that their issues are. So it's an ongoing piece, because they're also having the issue to get confirmation around whether their staff are double vaccinated or not.
Thanks, Terry. What about students? Because students also will need to do this. Will we have the data on that?
So we're basically looking at it for all of our people, for students, volunteers. We're even going to need to do it for governors as well. If we feel that part of their role is meeting patients as well.
Thank you. I mean, I asked that really because we absolutely understand why you're prioritising the conversations and getting people vaccinated at this stage. But as we move into that phase where we're assessing the risk, we need to know all those pieces of information. So I think on that basis, it feels as though we are likely to need to take some board decisions in a month or so before we meet formally as a board again. Colleagues will know that all of us meet together as IAC. So I think if there are requirements for board decisions, the expectation would be a short special board meeting on the IAC day if they're needed to confirm policies or deal with things, because we won't have very long, will we, until the point when concrete decisions have to be made about individuals. But on that basis, that the board would have a chance to convene if any board decisions are taken, and will be briefed in any event. I think the board is noting the contents of the report, notes the timeframes and challenges, and thanks Terry and the team for all the effort that's gone in so far. Thank you. I'd like now to move to taking the remaining items by exception, because we're already over the time I'd hope we'd make on this meeting. So I'll just check with the report leads whether there's anything really important to draw attention to. The next item is the maternity incentive scheme. Colleagues should note that there are some risks identified in that. Sam, is there anything you particularly want to draw our attention to?
I think the paper is quite clear. The timescales have moved, as you know, nationally. Tony is now chairing the Maternity Safety Champions meeting, so we'll have a particular focus on this at our next meeting and work through what divisional or board support we might need to mitigate these risks. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you. And I'm grateful to Tony for picking up that responsibility, which obviously closens the relationship we have as a board with those issues. On that basis, I hope we receive and note the report. Megan, learning from Des, anything particular we need to pick up, or can I invite the board to note that paper?
Thank you, Chair. Just one point to draw to your attention, which is item 6, section 6, which is the learning and actions and investigation into the nosocomial COVID-19 deaths from between last year, between the first and the second peak. I'm happy to take questions, but the reason I brought this to your attention is that we will be complying with our duty of candor in respect of all of these 58 patients' families, and also sharing the report with them.
Thank you. I think we have noted that. The BAF and mid-year review. Eileen, is there anything you particularly need to draw attention to?
Thank you, Chair. It's part of our normal assurance part. The BAF and risk register is familiar to colleagues through IAC on a regular basis. Anyhow, we continue with that. I would just say it's a point in time assessment because it's very fast moving. There are a huge number of discussions ongoing at the moment about emerging risks, certainly with Sam, Megan, Sarah, and also with Terry in relation to the discussion we just had on the vaccinations. So there will be more risks emerging over the next couple of weeks for consideration for the board.
Okay, thank you. So you will brief us as they emerge, but at this stage, I think we just note that. The next 3 items are committee notes, TME, Integrated Assurance Committee. I propose simply to suggest that we note those reports, and I'm not aware of any other business. In which case, I think we have got to the end of the public session of the board meetings. I apologise for failing to keep you to 10:30, but thanking you for discussion of a lot of really pertinent things that we deal with that, but not allowing us to get distracted into things that are not relevant for the current phase. So that will be the end of the recorded stage of the meeting.